Move to questions to Minister for Finance, and I call Connie again.
Question number 1, please.
Minister.
Of the Shared Prosperity Fund beyond March 2025 is of immediate concern and something which I've been pressing the British Government for progress on. I wrote to Angela Rayner as soon as she was appointed Secretary for State, highlighting the lack of information on a successor programme and the impact that this uncertainty is having on our community and voluntary sector. I asked that she deliver on the Labour Party manifesto commitment for greater devolved decision making, and I have also written to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury to raise my concerns on this issue. Tomorrow I will be meeting with Minister Alex Norris, who is responsible for future funding in the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. I will use this opportunity to once again press for urgent clarity on future funding, asking that sufficient funding is provided and that there is a meaningful decision-making role for the Executive.
Ms. Egan.
I thank the Minister for her answer. Could I please ask, Minister, what is your assessment of the funding shortfall which has arisen as a result of the loss of EU funds?
Minister.
So I'm just getting the figures here. From memory, ERDF and ESF jointly provided the Executive with about £65 million per year, and in comparison to that, the Shared Prosperity Fund provides an annual average of about £35 million per year, so that leaves a real funding gap of about £30 million annually, and that's even before inflation or anything else will be taken into account. So in my meetings with the British Government and all of the representation that we have made previously, we will be seeking full replacement of funding that we used to get from EU sources, including an inflationary increase.
Ciara Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for her answer thus far. The Minister, when future funding is being discussed and developed with your department, can that include collaboration with the CMV sector as well as local government?
Minister.
Yeah, I think collaboration is absolutely key to ensuring that any funding that we actually do get and the delivery of programmes with that funding aligns to our local priorities, that learns the lessons of previous funding programmes, doesn't duplicate anything that we are already doing or any existing provision, and ensures best value for money. And certainly, in my view, the best way to do that would be meaningful collaboration with the people that are actually delivering these programmes, with the community and voluntary sector and other partners, including local government. And I think as well, in preparation for the successor, my department has already begun working on a cross-departmental basis and been engaging with the community and voluntary sector to understand the lessons from shared prosperity and to be prepared for moving forward.
Dr. Aiken.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank the Minister for her remarks so far. Minister, obviously with the Shared Prosperity Fund and the events of last week, there is to be a degree of, let's say, scepticism about the approach of the UK Government to this funding. Has the Minister had any opportunity to reach out to our Welsh or Scottish counterparts so we can have a combined approach to make sure there's an equitable division of future UK shared prosperity money, please?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. And the member will be aware from his role in the Finance Committee that we do regular engagement through the FISC with the Scottish and Welsh Finance Ministers. Just last week I had a conversation with the Scottish Finance Minister around the financial challenges that are facing us collectively at the minute, and certainly we have in the past, and I'm sure will again in the future, collaborate and have joint positions and jointly make the case in relation to the replacement of EU funds and the post-2025 funding. I think it's really important that where we can have a shared position, and very often we come from a similar perspective, that we do make those joint representations.
Justin McDulty.
I thank the Minister for her answers thus far. The original Shared Prosperity Fund was clearly not designed with the North in mind, and these institutions had little control over how decisions or what decisions were taken. What conversations have you or your officials had with the new British Government to address those problems, and what commitments have you sought and what commitments have you got?
Sure.
Yeah, and I agree with the member's assessment of the Shared Prosperity Fund. It wasn't designed with the North in mind, and certainly didn't take on board the criticisms or the feedback that was provided in relation to the structure of the fund. And I suppose one of the most important aspects of that was there was no Section 75 consideration in relation to the delivery of those funds. So we have continuously made that representation in relation to there needing to be a more joined up approach. We have consistently said we should have control of the delivery of these funding streams, because then we can align them to our own priorities, make sure that they fit with other executive priorities, and that we aren't duplicating funding streams either. So we have made that, and I will continue to. And as I mentioned to Connie previously, I am meeting with the Minister responsible tomorrow.
Carl.
There's a growing call for a 1% tax on the 1% wealthiest in Britain to bring in £25 billion to plug the gap in public services. Did you or your officials raise such a point with the Treasury when you met them last week?
Minister.
So I have been consistent in highlighting the underinvestment in our public services, and that with this new government now in place, and after 14 years of austerity and chaos under the previous Tory government, that what we need to see is a change of approach. We need to see the prioritisation of investment in public services and ordinary workers and families, and that those who have the broadest shoulders, so to speak, those who can afford the most, pay the most. And that's the message that I have consistently put forward to the British government and did to the Chancellor last week.
Dennis.
Question 2.
Minister.
So I have previously indicated to members my intention to bring forward a bill to amend the current law on marriage and civil partnership, to bring belief marriage within the statutory framework, and to bring forward the important increase to the minimum age of marriage and civil partnership to 18. My officials have finalised instructions to Legislative Council, and the drafting of a bill is ready to commence. A paper was submitted to the Executive before summer recess seeking approval to proceed with the policy and the drafting of a bill. That paper has yet to secure a slot on the agenda, despite that being requested for the past 4 meetings. I very much hope it will be considered at the next available opportunity to enable these important proposed reforms to proceed and to be debated by the Assembly.
Dennis.
Thank the Minister for her response, and I welcome her focus on this issue. Could the Minister just provide an update on how far work to amend the law on marriage and civil partnership has progressed?
Minister.
So policy development is complete. My officials briefed the Finance Committee on the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill on the 17th of April. Members were supportive of the changes. I circulated a paper to Executive colleagues on the 21st of May and asked for this to be tabled at the Executive meeting on the 13th of June. A final version was available for the Executive meeting on the 19th of June, and since then the paper has failed to reach the agenda at the Executive meetings held on the 18th of July and 5th of September. My department is not able to make further progress until Executive approval is secured. I am unclear, given the very clear support for reform that the consultation process has indicated, coupled with the broad support received for the proposals from the Finance Committee, why agreement to proceed should be further delayed. I believe it's important that we now move to legislate, and I would appeal to colleagues to support the proposals so that we can get a bill to the Assembly for consideration in 2025.
Matthew, too.
Speaker, Minister, obviously it's my job to hold you to account occasionally robustly. I'm sure you enjoy that, but on this occasion I'm going to acknowledge you've got a lot on your plate and your department is doing a lot. There's a lot in the area of civil law reform, marriage, hopefully including no-fault divorce, defamation, etc., etc. Isn't it time to move responsibility, as it is in virtually all other jurisdictions, from your department for civil law to the Justice Department? There's a huge amount going on in terms of the fiscal position, budget, spending restraint. Why is this still with your department? Shouldn't it be with the Minister of Justice?
Minister.
Well, as the member will be aware from his role as Finance Chair, there are a number of civil law issues that sit with my department, and that has been the case since the department was put in place. So I don't necessarily agree with the member in relation to the need to move that to the Department for Justice.
Honourable McBurry.
And thank the Minister for the answers thus far. Can the Minister provide an update on her plans to reduce no-fault divorce in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Yeah, this is an issue that I would be keen to progress. We have debated this in the Chamber a number of months ago, and it's something that I have asked my officials to scope out what will be required and to bring forward policy proposals.
Emma Sheeran.
Question 3, please.
Minister.
My department published a summary of the consultation responses on the non-domestic and domestic rating measures last week on the department's website. Over 1,400 responses were received from ratepayers, businesses and a range of other stakeholders. My department also undertook a series of public meetings as part of this process, and I want to thank everyone who contributed to the process with their thoughts, ideas and experience. I met with officials at the end of August to outline next steps in relation to advancing policy, and I will be bringing forward short, medium and long-term rating policy proposals, including a more strategic long-term policy approach early next month. As part of this process, I will be engaging with executive colleagues and will continue engagement with business bodies, organisations and other stakeholders to work together to build a progressive rate system which grows our tax base and stimulates our local economy.
Zenos.
Minister, can you advise when you intend to bring your policy proposals to the Executive?
Minister.
Well, I had met with officials at the end of last month to advance policy proposals, and it would be my intention to bring forward those proposals that will look at what we can do in the immediate term, and then in what we can look to do in the immediate term, and then in the medium and longer term, early next month to the Executive. Obviously, any decisions around these issues will be for the Executive as a whole to consider and to decide upon.
Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister, the previous government set a target of revenue raising £130 million annually. Can you update the House on progress towards meeting that target?
Yes, so as the member will be aware, that as part of the financial package, there was that requirement, a requirement that we didn't agree should be in there, but nonetheless that was Treasury's position, and I was able to negotiate some flexibility in relation to that so that it could be raised over 24 months rather than 12. I would be happy to update members that it's projected this year we will raise an additional £80 million, and that's based on decisions that the Executive has made, including in relation to the regional rate, but also on a number of other areas.
Mr. McLone.
Minister, there have been some reports that you're planning to phase out industrial derating. Can you clarify whether this is the case, as I'm sure you would want to agree with the rest of us that it's a substantial advantage and would be severely disadvantageous if it were to be removed for many of our SMEs and manufacturing businesses, particularly given the dual access that they have to the respective markets?
Sir.
Yeah, and as part of my consideration of the responses to the consultation, I had the opportunity to meet with a number of business organisations and also businesses, and obviously I'll not preempt any proposals that are going to the Executive for discussion or decision, but what I would say to the member is I very much recognise the role that industrial derating has played in supporting local manufacturers. I think we have a very strong manufacturing sector that supports an awful lot of jobs, and anything that we would be doing, it needs to align with what we're trying to achieve in terms of our economic vision of creating good jobs, of improving productivity, of decarbonisation and of regional balance. And I think when you look at the manufacturing sector, it ticks an awful lot of those boxes.
Robbie Butler.
I thank the Minister for her answer on this topic. Can the Minister then outline what the expected revenue to be raised from the proposals to remove industrial derating might be? the exemption, and has you considered impacts on the, and I think you've already spoken to it, the impacts on the manufacturing in Northern Ireland?
So I'm giving the member a figure off the top of my head, and I will be happy to clarify it because it will be in the consultation itself, but I think it's 70 million is what industrial de-rating costs. And as I said, I won't preempt any proposals that are going to the executive for discussion, and obviously anything that we are considering doing in relation to the rating system has to be about being progressive and fair and equitable, but it also has to be about what we're trying to achieve in terms of the economy, as I have just set out to Patsy.
Mr.
The executive received £57.2 million of Barnett consequentials for 2024-25 following the announcement in the spring budget of the expansion of the 30 free hours of childcare scheme in England. Barnett consequentials, of course, are unhypothecated, meaning that they do not have to be used for the purposes for which they were issued, but rather in line with the executive's priorities. The executive as a whole recognises the importance of delivering for children and young people in our society, and this is reflected in the fact that the executive invested an additional £25 million this year to progress measures supporting early learning and childcare initiatives, including measures to stabilise the sector itself. This funding is already making a difference through the new childcare subsidy scheme, which had almost 10,000 children signed up to it within just 2 weeks of it opening. The families of these children will see their childcare bills reduced from September 2024. Despite the significant financial pressures on the executive's budget, we are committed to making childcare more affordable for families, and that was reflected again in the draft programme for government, which was published last week.
Mr. Gasson.
Thank you. 25 million is some way short of the 57.2 million that have been told by the Minister, which means there's 32 million being spent elsewhere. We hear much chest beating about what we're doing for childcare. Why are parents being shortchanged, and why is that money being diverted elsewhere?
Yeah, and the member will be aware of the significant financial pressures facing the executive's budget that I outlined to the Chamber last week. Currently, departments are projecting pressures of £767 million for this year. So, as I mentioned in my previous answer, when Barnett consequentials for any issue come across, they are unhypothecated and have to be utilised by the executive in the way that it decides. I think that the interim package of measures that we have put in place is designed to inform the executive's early learning and childcare strategy, which has long been in development, and it's also designed to support the sector. And I am aware from conversations with the Education Minister that there is a ramping up required and capital investment required to support the expansion of the 22.5 hours per week preschool provision, as well as ensuring that the childcare sector itself is able to expand its support. So certainly, I think that the executive, despite the constrained budget that we have, did show that we prioritised childcare by the £25 million that we held centrally, and that the Education Minister subsequently brought forward proposals for. And it's something that we are seeking to build upon, and I am sure that we will invest further in the future.
An hour Kierna Ahara, to extend that point further, what other Barnett consequentials do you expect our power sharing executive to receive?
Minister.
So we know that we will be receiving additional resource Barnett consequentials in year. However, the total of these won't be confirmed until we get our Westminster supplementary estimates, which is usually in January. Given the level of pressures that we face, I had asked my officials to engage with discussions with Treasury on the likely direction of travel for Barnett consequentials, and the final level of consequentials obviously is dependent on Whitehall's departments, what they get in relation to additional funding, and also if they have an ability to deliver savings. So there is some degree of uncertainty, but it would be my intention to allocate an additional £500 million.
Ian McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your answers. Minister, part of the reason why childcare costs have actually spiralled out of control here is the failure to keep a pace with those spending across the water in relation to childcare support. Can you guarantee, now that it is a priority of this programme for government, that you as Finance Minister will prioritise childcare, and when relevant consequentials come along, that it will go to the place where it is most needed, and that is childcare, because failure in this place has led to the out-of-control costs.
Yeah, and I thank the member for her question, and I think that we did show how childcare was a priority for the Executive, because despite the really challenging budgetary situation that we found ourselves in, we still did ring-fence money to be allocated specifically to childcare. Childcare is one of the priorities in the draft programme for government, and as the member will be aware, and certainly all of us would hope that the budget will be aligned to priorities within the programme for government going forward, but also what comes across in Barnett Consequentials. Very often ministers will make the case that it should be for the purposes for which it has been allocated in England, but the whole point of devolved government is that we make decisions that align with our own interests. Childcare is a priority that's reflected in the programme for government. It's reflected in the fact that there was a ring-fenced pot of money there in the budget, and certainly it's something that I would intend and invest in the future.
And thank you, Minister. As part of a broader childcare strategy, is the Minister considering introducing support through the rate system for early years and childcare settings, building on the experience in Scotland and Wales?
Minister.
I thank the member for her question, and obviously this is something that has been considered, and I guess the intention of any support that we would put towards the childcare sector is that it makes childcare more affordable for parents and for families, and the analysis is that the rates, the amount of money that would be going towards individual providers may not make a significant contribution to the reduction in any fees for parents. However, it's something that I am open to further consideration of, and if the Education Minister were to make any policy proposals in that space, certainly I would be open to considering them.
Declan McAleer.
Big, question 5, Liddell.
There had been excellent progress on the Derry City and Strabane District Council City deal, which was preparing for deal signing this week. As you will now be aware, the British Government took the deplorable decision to pause its funding commitment to city and growth deals until further consideration in the spending review. The British Government delivered this shocking news to deal partners on Friday afternoon, and Derry City and Strabane District Council was then forced to cancel its deal signing event, which had been planned for this Wednesday, the 18th, in the Guildhall, an event for which invites to a large number of guests had already gone out. After widespread uproar and appeals to reverse this reprehensible move, I received a phone call from the Secretary of State late on Saturday evening. He advised that the British Government was going ahead with the Derry City and Strabane deal, and an email followed from his office confirming this. Following that, late on Sunday evening, my office received an email from the NIO stating the Secretary of State was also happy to confirm that following communication with Treasury, nothing has changed on the status of the Belfast Region City deal. I am pleased to say the Derry City and Strabane District Council has reinstated the planned event for Wednesday, and the Derry City and Strabane City deal will be signed. This will be a momentous milestone for the people of the North West, and I am glad that sense has prevailed, but it is now essential that the pause on funding commitments be lifted as a matter of urgency for all deals, who should not have to wait until the spending review for clarity.
Mr. McAleer.
I thank the Minister for her response and indeed share her sentiments. Deplorable decision, shocking news and a reprehensible move. And also it's good that the deal is back on track. The Minister will be aware that there are other deals. I'm thinking of the Mid-South West deal, which covers Fermanagh, Omagh, ABC and Mid-Ulster, and of course the Causeway, Coast and Glens. So is there any update on the progress of those deals?
Well, the member will be aware I made a statement just before question time, and certainly my very clear view is that the pause needs to be lifted on those deals and the funding commitment to those deals. Also, I think there can be absolutely no disparity between the different deals. I met with the chief executives and representatives of the Mid-South West and Causeway Coast and Glens deal this morning, and I share their frustration and anger at the handling of this matter, and I reassured them that I am in their corner. There can be no disparity of treatment between the deals, and it's essential that the pause on that funding commitment be lifted. I have followed up with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, making clear that Mid-South West and Causeway Coast and Glens shouldn't have to wait for that clarity. And I will update members that I will be now speaking to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury later this afternoon, and I would appeal again for the British Government to reverse this appalling decision.
Deborah Erskine.
Answers and in coming to the House as well in relation to her statement. I'm conscious that she'll be coming again to answer questions, and no doubt I'll have more. But I just wanted to ask, in terms of the Mid-South West growth deal, which is obviously my area, how does that fit in with our policy of regional, stripping out regional imbalance? Because we now have a situation in which we have some council areas that have growth deals in place, others are paused now. So how does that fit in, and is that being taken to the Treasury and to the Northern Ireland Secretary of State?
And I thank the member for her question, and I completely agree with her analysis, and certainly you represent Mid-South West, I represent Causeway Coast and Glens, and I think we probably share frustration as to the difference in treatment that there now is between the deals, and certainly that's the case that I made to the Chancellor on Thursday in relation to all of the deals in general, but the fact that they are about promoting local economic development, they're about creating jobs in local areas, they're about addressing the infrastructure deficits that we have, particularly in our rural areas and in certain parts of the north. So these deals to me are game changers for regions right across the north, and that's why I will be continuing to make that case that that pause is unpaused as soon as possible.
Colin Crawford.
And I thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Can the Minister update us on the role of her department as the responsible accounting body for city deals, and by which means she is ensuring effective governance?
Minister.
So, as the member will be aware, the deals, the Department of Finance leads on the delivery of city and growth deals, but they involve partners, including local government and private sector partners, and are delivered across a number of departments as well. So my department does take the central role and has been very active, as you would imagine, over the course of this weekend in communicating with partners, but also in communicating with Treasury to try to ensure that the pause that was put in place in relation to the funding commitment was lifted, and they are working very hard to ensure that that is the case for the remaining two deals.
Durkin.
Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the work that has been done over the weekend to get this deal back on track. I know Caoimhe Eastwood, my party colleague, was especially active over the weekend. The Minister has told us in her statement earlier that she became aware of the proposed pause in funding on Wednesday. Herself and the First Ministers raised it with the Treasury on Thursday. Did the Treasury indicate at any stage or in any way how or when they intended to make their decision and position public?
Minister.
No, they didn't, and in fact it was only communicated at official level and brought to my attention on Wednesday afternoon, because it was such a concerning announcement and came as such as a bolt out of the blue. These are really important projects that have, as you know, been years in the making, and I think the handling of it and the communication in particular has been absolutely shambolic, and there has been no formal communication with deal partners, which again I think is deplorable. So those are points I will of course be relaying and already have done so, and I think what we need to see is a better reflection on how the British Government engages with us as an executive, but also with our constituents.
Alan Robinson.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I met with the Chancellor in London last week, along with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. This followed an initial meeting with the Chancellor in July, shortly after she came into office, and I have also separately met with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury at the end of July. These meetings provided an opportunity to highlight the budget pressures facing the Executive and to make the case that the Executive needs to be properly funded and to be able to deliver the public services that people here expect and need. However, as set out in the Prime Minister's statement and in the Chancellor's statement, where they have been at pains to point out a difficult budget coming, public finances are under extreme pressure, with Whitehall departments being asked to find savings. Scotland and Wales are also facing significant pressures. The action being taken by the Scottish Government has been well publicised, and while there will be further Barnett consequentials later this year, these will fall significantly below the level of pressures that we are currently facing and as I outlined to the Chamber last week. But I will continue to make the case to the British Government that more funding is needed for public services and to support our families, workers and businesses.
Moving to topical questions, Matthew O'Toole.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, we've discussed city deals and the discussion with the Chancellor on Thursday. Can I ask, in addition to city deals, was the question of the funding of Caoimhe Park raised by either yourself, First or Deputy First Ministers? And if so, what were you told by the Chancellor of the Exchequer? And if it wasn't raised, why not?
So obviously the issue of Caoimhe Park has been raised on many occasions with the Chancellor and obviously with all levels of the British Government. I think we have been told on a number of occasions that a decision was imminent, and it came on Friday evening after many months of dither and delay from the previous Tory Government, which effectively ran down the clock and left us in the position that we are now in.
Mr. O'Toole.
Minister, if I'm to understand the questions you've given me, it wasn't raised, because I think you would have told me specifically if it had been raised at Thursday's meeting. If it wasn't raised at Thursday's meeting, at any point were you or your officials made aware before Thursday of the decision that the UK Government were going to announce on Friday? But could you confirm that it wasn't raised on Thursday?
Minister.
We took the opportunity to raise the need for investment in public services and capital infrastructure. At no point were my officials made aware that an announcement was being made on Friday evening.
Minister, I understand your department has commissioned the University of Ulster to carry out work on who is best to set non-domestic rates going forward, with a view to having business rates set centrally by the Executive. Can you confirm if this is the case, and when do you expect the scope of work to be completed to allow councils to make the necessary preparations for the 26-27 rate setting process?
Minister.
So the Economic Policy Centre conducts research on behalf of a range of people. My department had asked for some research to be done on the poundage across the north and the impact of the poundage across the different district councils. So I think that's a slightly different issue than the one to which the member refers.
Mr. Gosson.
Yeah, it certainly is. So that's where I'm going with my question. Last year, Mid and East Antrim set a business rate by a staggering increase of 11.86%. The move that I'm referring to within your department, is this a safeguard being brought in by the Department of Finance to protect businesses for this happening in the future?
Minister.
Is research being looked at that doesn't necessarily lead directly to a policy change being implemented, and as I have said in my previous answers in relation to the rates consultation, proposals will be going to the Executive on the short, medium and longer term rates measures in coming weeks, and it will of course be for the Executive to decide.
Philip McGuigan.
Minister to provide an update on the sale of Clarence Court, Netherley and Victoria Hall.
Minister.
So my department is progressing an ambitious review of its office estate with the aim of reducing the in-scope footprint by 40% in March 2028. The sales process is nearing completion for Netherley House, for Clarence Court and Victoria Hall, and officials are confident that sales will be completed in coming weeks.
Minister. Mr. McGuigan.
Thank you for the promotion, Cian Collier. I thank the Minister for her answer, and if I could maybe follow up and ask her what difference the sale of these properties would make to public finances.
Minister.
So the sale of the buildings will enable some much needed capital funding to be reinvested in public services, while also reducing the costs for the executive and costs as well as for the buildings themselves, but for energy usage as well.
Colin Crawford.
Can I ask the Minister whether the Chancellor of the Exchequer committed to the Barnett provisions anticipated within the NI Executive's 24-25 budget at her meeting on Thursday?
Minister.
So, if I understand the question, the additional Barnett consequentials that have been are based on our assumptions after discussions with Treasury. So that's based on engagement at official level about what is likely to be coming towards the Executive for the rest of the year. As I said in some of my previous answers, the actual Barnett consequentials won't be confirmed until we get supplementary estimates, which will be in January. So I suppose the Chancellor wouldn't be in a position to confirm what those Barnett consequentials were at this point, and the allocations that I would be intending to make are based on the direction of travel and discussions between officials.
Mr. Crawford.
I thank the Minister for her answer. If and when the Minister does receive such commitments, will she commit to sharing these details with the Finance Committee as soon as possible?
Minister.
And I thank the member for his question, and of course the relationship between the Department and the Finance Committee is one where such information would regularly be shared, and we would try to be as transparent as possible.
Paul Fruit.
The Minister will know only too well that the pausing of the Causeway Coast and Glens growth deals will have huge economic and social implications for my constituents and indeed her constituents, with millions of pounds now maybe disappearing from plans that have been developed over a long number of years. What about the match funding that sits within Council and within other private partners? Minister, can you give any clarification of how that money sits?
Minister.
So, and I agree with the member, it's really concerning, and an awful lot of effort and time, as he will know, has gone into developing those projects. And we signed the heads of terms for the Causeway Coast and Glens growth deal just back in April, and we are now at the stage where there has been considerable investment in developing the business cases, and unfortunately the position that we are in at the minute is that we still have a lot of question marks that we can't give answers to deal partners about. And I met with the Chief Executive of Causeway Coast and Glens this morning and relayed my reassurance that I'm doing all I can to get those answers and to get that pause lifted.
Mr. Fruit.
Her efforts in this regard for all of our constituents. Has the Minister any indication from the Labour Government as to how long our constituents will have to wait for this spending review?
Minister.
And I thank the member for his question. And my understanding is they mean the 30th of October and the budget date. However, I am awaiting for full clarification from Treasury in relation to quite a lot of issues, and it is my view that Causeway Coast and Glens and Mid-South West should not be in the position that they have to wait until the end of October before getting the same level of clarity that the deals will be going ahead as the Belfast region and Derry City and Strabane already have. There should be absolutely no disparity between the deals.
Robbie Butler.
Can I ask the Minister in regard to property management companies, is her department engaged in any reform or policy-led changes, and could we get an update on that, please?
Minister.
The issue of management companies is one that I have had quite a bit of correspondence on from members, and I'm sure many of us will have received concerns from constituents in relation to this matter. So it is something that I have raised with officials and have asked what can be done. Now, there, as you will be aware, there are different responsibilities across a number of departments in relation to some of these issues, but it is something that I have asked officials to take a look at.
Mr. Butler.
Mr. Speaker, and the Minister may well be aware that there is a piece of legislation making passage in Westminster. Is the Minister aware, for instance, and this is quite local to me in Lagan Valley, that particularly with leasehold properties in complex arrangements where there is commercial and residential, that those properties are not only being impacted by the management fees, which is outstripping the rates, but also it's devaluing their properties, where people who are trying to sell their properties are having to decrease the value of the property to make a sale?
I'm not aware of the specific issue that he's referring to in relation to Lagan Valley. I do know that there have been a number of concerns raised in relation to the management fees issue in general, but I'd be happy if the member wants to correspond with me in relation to that particular issue, and we can get some advice from officials on it.
Alan Robinson.
Update the House on plans for the baby loss scheme. Certificate scheme, sorry.
And I thank the member for his question, and I know it's something that he has raised with me on a number of occasions and that he has considerable interest in. He will be aware that I'm committed to delivering that scheme, and I think it will help recognise the loss that parents feel and hopefully, in some small way help them to process that. I met with the Health Minister just last Monday to review ongoing work and plans for the next steps in the delivery of a baby loss scheme and baby loss certificates here. I'm keen to see this progress as quickly as possible, and my officials have been engaging with Department of Health officials around the kind of practicalities of that.
Mr Robinson.
Can you assure the House, Minister, that this scheme will be delivered by the end of this mandate?
Mr.
It certainly would be my intention to ensure that it is delivered by the end of the mandate, and what we're doing at the minute is scoping the options as to how it can be delivered, and it's my intention to make that happen as quickly as possible.
Malaysia McHugh.
Concorla, can I ask for an update on the transformation programme?
Public sectors across the north, as the member will be aware, are in critical need of investment and reform to ensure that we can deliver high quality public services and to do so efficiently. Transformation will be essential to doing that, and also to help put the Executive's finances on a more sustainable footing. So I had brought a proposal to the Executive to set up an interim transformation programme on the 9th of May and quickly establish the interim transformation board, which is giving consideration to proposals currently to utilise the £47 million of transformation funding for this year. The board has completed its first stage assessment and 47 proposals have been received.
Mr McHugh.
Thank you, Minister, for your response thus far. And could you maybe provide us with more detail on the proposals received?
Minister.
So 29 of the proposals that have been received are continuing to move forward. 18 of those will be included within a digital landscape review, as a number of departments had brought forward proposals in the digital space, and we thought it would be the most effective use of money to do something collectively in relation to that. A further 11 will move to a stage 2 assessment. Clearly, the £235 million of transformation funding that has been made available to the Executive across 5 years in the financial package will in no way tackle the magnitude of issues that we have. However, I'm committed to making the best use of these resources and to doing so as effectively as possible to develop and implement a model of delivery which will help stimulate the transformation of public services.
Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, do you agree that tackling the cost of division is key to placing our public finances on a sustainable footing? And if so, what steps are you taking to assess and address that cost?
Mr.
The member will be aware that we have asked departments for proposals in relation to transformation funding, and that he will also be aware that in terms of the budget sustainability work, we have committed to looking at all opportunities to deliver efficiency, so where there is duplication to generate revenue, and look at the type of tools that we need to effectively manage our public services.
Mr Tennyson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, if that's the case, why did you support an amendment to a motion which removed a reference to the sustainability plan dealing with the cost of division?
Well, the member will be aware of the content of the amendment last week, and I can't remember the exact detail of it, but from my perspective, I felt that I added to the motion as it stood. Certainly, I think that we need to do all we can to put our finances in a more sustainable footing and to be able to deliver the best public services that we can and what people that we represent expect and deserve.
That brings to a conclusion questions to the Minister for Finance. Patsy McLone has given notice of an urgent oral question to Minister for Infrastructure. I'd remind members that if they wish to ask a supplementary question, they should rise continually in their places. The member who tabled the question will be called automatically to ask a supplementary. Clerk, please read the question.